Good morning and welcome to Productivity Awareness Week 2021 with the Agriculture's Perspective. The topic being discussed this morning is how should agriculture be repositioned to fill more space in Saint Lucia's economic basket. We have a diverse panel made up of Mr. Nicholas Faisal, Agri-Exporters Association, Ms. Paula James, Saint Lucia Manufacturers Association, Mr. Kemwell Jabaptist, Department of Agriculture, Dr. Melville of the Livestock Division, Mr. Dunstan DeMille of Marcy Stores St. Lucia, and Ms. Lisa Hunt from the Ministry of Health. A diverse panel ready to discuss the topic, how should agriculture be repositioned to fill more space in St. Lucia's economic basket. To start off this morning's discussion, just a short preamble, we do know that the rapid structural changes in the global and regional economies, coupled with the integration of value chains from farm to table, new emerging development challenges to the country's rural and agricultural economy, signal the need for a radical rethinking and approach to agriculture and rural development. Such shifts must adopt approaches that provides scope for self-propelled, people-centered development. Mr. Kemwell Jabaptist, to start off this morning's discussion, we would ask of you to give us a feel of what is happening, or a brief synopsis of what is happening within your sector, your area within the Ministry of Agriculture.
Good morning. Thank you, moderator, for this opportunity, and thank you for this opportunity to participate in this conversation. Three broad areas identified for today's conversation: food security and nutrition, diversification, and of course, trade and export. Our agriculture historically came out of export motivations. Plantation times, we were generally into the coffee and the cocoa, bananas, coconuts, and so on. Most of it was geared towards export markets. Over time, as country development emerged, as the tourism product became enhanced and increased, we recognized that the country itself, the tourism itself provided an opportunity, so agriculture was redirected into diversification. Diversification goes way back to the early 70s, and we could see the emerging extension advisory services at the time to support that diversification. Diversification also was motivated by the fact that the country itself, as development emerged, population increased, that food security became a priority, and of course, nutrition security. Over the years, we've seen huge investments made in the sector. Back in the days of cocoa, we're still making huge investments in bananas, huge investments in terms of developing the non-traditional crops, including the vegetables and so on for the local market. The government of Saint Lucia has, in fact, set out policies that seeks to support diversification efforts, and these go way back more than 30 years ago. And essentially, it was diversification. It was designed to shift us away from monocropping, from a heavy reliance on export trade, to ensuring that there is sufficient food and available food for our population and for those who visit our shores. And so this is why we went into diversification. Generally, the diversification has been away from the traditional plantation crops like bananas and coconuts and so on. Although in the process of doing so, we have maintained intercropping and multi-cropping in many respects. And so St. Lucia has an agricultural policy that looks at youth involvement, that looks at all of these topics that we're talking about. There's a focus on export agriculture as we speak. In terms of food and nutrition security, we have projects such as the 7 Crops Project that is intended to increase local production. We have support from foreign donor countries such as Morocco that's helping us with our soil nutrition and so on. So there are a large number of projects that are looking at the whole issue of food and nutrition security. Export Saint Lucia has been a major partner with the Department of Agriculture, with the agriculture sector, seeking for opportunities for trade globally on the global scale. We have challenges where export agriculture is concerned because of the volumes that are generally required for regional and international trade. And we continue to strive in those areas, and for export now, the focus is on niche marketing. Our export and trade is not only limited to sending produce out. In recent times, the conversation has emerged that says, look, your tourism market is actually an export market. And so every bit of produce that is traded with a hotelier or a restaurateur that feeds foreigners and visitors is actually an export market. And so a lot of emphasis is being placed on that. The department recognizes the invaluableness of partnerships, and so we've seen partnerships emerge with the private sector, and I'm glad we have a representative from Massey Stores here. They've been a huge partner in organizing our markets. The non-traditional market historically was relegated to Saint Lucia Marketing Board and the street market. Today we have partners such as Massey Stores, we have CPJ Caribbean Producers Jamaica Limited, we have Trans-Caribbean, so there's a plethora of partners that have emerged over the years. And so essentially, food and nutrition security is a priority of the government. Diversification has been motivated by the fact that we need to ensure that food and security is sustained. And of course, our trade and export continues to emerge as we shift away from the usual monocropping into multi-cropping and looking at niche marketing for trade and export.
Thank you for that. Mr. DeMille, from Massey St. Lucia's perspective, what is happening in your domain, and leaning from some of what Mr. Jean-Baptiste would have highlighted in terms of Massey being a readily available market for those producers? Speak to that and what is happening within your sector.
Good morning to all. Good morning, Saint Lucia. And I'm sure we will all appreciate that with the climate of COVID-19, and we experiencing a hurricane a few months ago, there's a number of challenges when it comes to food production in Saint Lucia. Farm labor is one of the biggest issues we face now. I don't know if we are aware of that. Also, we have a number of challenges when it comes to getting timely inputs, because when the farmers need a product to nourish the plants or whatnot and they don't have it, all that affects production. We had a number of crop failures. I mean, in the Babono area, although we get a lot of rain, but I'm sure you will appreciate from about May to November, we have a retarded growth of plants in that area in terms of a lot of the leafy vegetables. And that too is reflected at our stores. We also have a number of post-harvest challenges, because with Prix d'Alasani being as it is now, you find a lot of persons trying to harvest before the thieves come and steal the product. So sometimes the maturity stage is not optimum for the market. And you know, some of those go to waste, because so much of the food we produce go to waste. And at our depots, I mean, we would go through a selection process, because by now we know what our customers are looking for. We feel responsible when it comes to people food nutrition intake, so you try to make sure you have the nutritious foods. We deal a lot with the farmers in the rural communities and help them figure out what to produce for the supermarkets. We have also made some bold steps. I'm sure you are aware we opened a supermarket in Choiseul, and we now have 2 supermarkets in Soufrière, and we moved the Boulevard store to our new city store, right? And all that, I mean, in that kind of climate of COVID. So it shows you, you know, that there are opportunities. It's not that everything is bad and everything is lost. There are opportunities, but I think the only way we can really take, I won't say advantage, but really, you know, get some of those opportunities. It's for us to have a holistic approach to it. We have to work together. The Ministry of Agriculture and Massey, I'm sure you know from, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, maybe about since 2007, we have that program with farmers doing the registration. At the time it was certification, but now it's registration. And Massey have been paying an extra 22 cents to every farmer who live up to our expectations in terms of what was taught on the program. I mean, from 2007 to now, I'm sure you'll appreciate that have amounted to millions of dollars. So, plus, I mean, we too have a farmers loan program. In the new climate now, we find so many farmers coming and looking for loans. And not only that, we have to even talk to our accounts department for some farmers to give them a little more time to pay, right? Because, you know, they got damaged crops and whatnot for the hurricane, or sometimes they depending on a crop to pay the debt, and somebody pass and harvest long before them. So you have a number of unique challenges. But we even face a lot of challenges with the importation of produce into Saint Lucia. There's also a lot of shortages, and they will tell you they have issues with farm labor, you know, they have issues with COVID also. So you find, you know, persons are not available to harvest at the time when they have to. You also have a number of increased prices. I know a lot of time we get blamed for it, but you know, shipping costs is going up, and all that affects what price our food is at our stores. I'm sure you'll appreciate you hardly see ripe bananas on our shelves now, although the prices have increased, but it's just not available. So all in all, we're trying to deal with a lot of those challenges, but COVID and the hurricane brought a lot of unique challenges. But we in the environment, we have to live up to it and also try to, you know, ensure that our practices are safe, because we have to take human health, animal health, plant health, all of those things as serious as we should, so that we there and the next generation can be there to continue taking on the challenges so that we can get food, nutritious food to eat in our country.
We've heard from the Ministry of Agriculture and Massey Store on their partnership and the strides they are making within this sector. From the Ministry of Health perspective, what is happening as it relates to food safety, nutrition, and are we eating the right foods? As we've heard, the health of a nation is the wealth of a nation. Speak to that from the Ministry of Health perspective.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning, viewers and listeners. Well said, Yvonne. The wealth of a country really depends on how healthy we are. And we are at this forum this morning discussing how we can reposition agriculture to improve our food basket. And there is a very strong link between agriculture and nutrition. Currently, we do have increasing cases of childhood obesity, obesity in adulthood, non-communicable diseases. And so to be food and nutrition secure is to ensure that our people are healthy. Are we secure here? Food and nutrition security, there is a bit of difference. Food security entails that we have adequate calories for everybody in a country that is sufficient, that they can live their active lives. Nutrition security takes it a step further, where the food that is produced must ensure that this food is nutritious. Food security can ensure that we get adequate calories, but doesn't speak to nutrition. Nutrition security ensures that we are getting the nutrients that we need so that we can live healthy and active lives. Now, do we have adequate food and nutrition security in Saint Lucia to ensure that? If we did, our health status would be different. And so there is a very strong link between agriculture and nutrition. What is the outcome of these two is food. How do we get our food that we consume? We get it from agriculture. Now, getting the food from agriculture doesn't necessarily mean that the food is going to be healthy. So you must take into consideration how the food is produced. There are many different aspects that speaks to that. To ensure that we have a healthy nation, we need to have a food system that is viable, that is sustainable, and that every stakeholder must play their part. We must be speaking the same language. I heard you speak about food wastage. When we have people in Saint Lucia that does not have adequate food and we have food being wasted, this is part of the food chain that can affect our food and nutrition security. So food safety plays a part. Everybody along the food chain, including the farmer, plays a very important role. You have the distributor. You have the scientist that comes up with different technology as to how to, store food or etc. So all these stakeholders, including the nutritionist, the chef who prepares the food, all these different stakeholders, policymakers, to ensure that everybody can get food that is adequate and also affordable. The food might be available. Is it accessible to everybody? Can everybody afford it? We need to speak of a system, a food system, that can enable people to afford the food. We may have the food there, but it may not be accessible to the poor. So this is coming from the nutritional standpoint. Nutrition and agriculture has a very strong link. They need to continue to work together and see how we can make our people in St. Lucia healthier. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And a balanced plate would include livestock. It would include your meat, your fish. And so from the livestock division, speak to how this bears fruit from your department and your division as it relates to the topic. What is happening and how does livestock play a role in what has been discussed or placed on the table so far?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Ms. Edwin. Good morning to our viewers, and good morning to the panelists as well. Thank you for that. Drawing a page from what Mr. Jean-Baptiste mentioned earlier, coming from diversification, the diversification thrust back in the 70s, I think he said, and moving away from the monoculture of bananas and so on, there was a greater emphasis on livestock production in Saint Lucia, and that includes commodities like poultry, and in poultry we look at poultry meats as well as egg production, table eggs. There was a growing move towards greater increases in the pork, in the swine subsector, cattle, small ruminants, meaning sheep and goat, and even apiculture. And looking at the trends in consumption patterns, not just St. Lucia, but let's look at globally, we've seen an increased demand for animal products throughout the world globally, an increased consumption in meat specifically, in table eggs, in dairy products. And that again has been due to that shift in globalization, that shift in increased technology, and that growth of wealth that you see among people. As people become more wealthy, as finances increase, you see a greater demand for these products. And you can see it locally as well. Decades ago, the amount of meat that you'd see on the plate has dramatically increased, and people's desire for this particular commodity has increased. And in St. Lucia, we've seen there's a high import bills as it pertains to poultry and pork specifically. I'm looking at my figures here. In 2020, we imported several millions kilograms of chicken only, and so our local production has increased over the years, from looking at 10% of the market to now we produce close to 25-28% the local chicken production. So there has been that increase in the livestock sector, the growth of the livestock sector over the years. We are still not able to meet local demands. We still have a high import bill as it pertains to these particular products, but we are making strides. Presently, we are self-sufficient in table eggs, so all of the eggs that we consume are locally produced eggs, and we can. This is something that we can be proud of. In terms of commodities like apiculture, we see an increased thrust for commodities like honey. And a lot of people fail to see the link between honey and livestock, but it is an animal product. And so we've seen that increased desire, that increased demand for these sort of products, for honey as well. And it is one of the few commodities in the livestock sector that we see that there is export potential. And we're working closely with agencies like Export St. Lucia as well to see how we can push exports of honey. So there is a lot happening in the livestock sector, but a lot needs to be done. A lot can be done to decrease that food import bill, to satisfy that local demand. And again, that is because of many of the challenges that we face in the livestock sector, challenges that have been mentioned previously. Lastly, another challenge in the livestock sector is dog predation, dog aggression. So you find that we have a high stray dog population in Saint Lucia, and they wreak havoc on our sheep and goat population. And even in some rare instances, the cattle, because they can attack the smaller animals as well. So we have that issue. We have these challenges. The high cost of production for livestock products is also a major challenge for us. It's a high cost of production, and it makes it difficult to compete with the imported product as it pertains to price and cost. But we can say that having produced a product that is grown, that is produced locally, we can work towards increasing quality. You have greater freshness and so on. We can attest to that. We have strict controls in what is used in our livestock sector as pertains to chemicals and other products. So there's a lot going on, and we see that demand, we see that growing need, and we need to push and increase our local production as it pertains to livestock. Thank you.
Ms. Paula James, with a manufacturer's voice, speak to what manufacturers are feeling, hearing what has been placed on the table this morning as it relates to the theme. What are manufacturers' views on this, and what is happening as it relates to the topic?
For our sector, almost 75% of our membership do food processing, and they work very closely with a lot of the farmers. They have to, because of the products which we produce with regards to food. And working with farmers, most of them have to have a niche number of farmers that they have to have and must stay on board with them, would be able to produce, so that they'll be able to produce what it is they do locally. We work very closely with Bureau of Standards to make sure that all our processors and manufacturers as a whole do have standards, and they must follow the standards. And so for us, with COVID coming in, we already had that in place, so it made life a little easier with regards to standards and quality. We work very closely with the ministry also and the veterinary department, because without them, we cannot do a lot of our processing with regard to meats and poultry and all our food. So they have to do some farm visitation to make sure everything is fine with our farmers. And the challenges we face, we competing with, as Dr. Melville said, with the imports, it will always be there because of cost. And for us, fortunately, we're now seeing persons are gravitating towards local products. They use almost less antibiotic, and they only have to do that with the permission of the vet if something is wrong. But they don't, and it's healthier for us in St. Lucia when we look at local produce. Looking at the farmers, if you look at our largest exporter, which is Barron, with regards to food, he has a niche of about 30 to 40 farmers who work with him to grow specific herbs and peppers and stuff like that. So he has that quality, quantity, and they must be trained on a consistent basis. He actually brings in Cardi, I think, out of Trinidad, to work with his farmers to make sure they stick with the quality and the standards, because he exports to over 15 or 20 markets internationally. So he has to stick with his ISO standards. So that is a must. And when we look at other things that we do, there's a lot of persons who make teas. All our herbs are grown locally. So again, we see farming playing a critical role in the processing sector within manufacturing, because that is how our processors get their raw material. So for us, COVID coming on board made challenges whereby we had to adjust to the social distancing. That was the hardest thing for our processors and manufacturers, because with regards to standards and quality, they have to do that prior to COVID, so that was not an issue. It was mainly social distancing. They had to rearrange their processing plans to make sure that you have that. Some of them had to bring in buses to take their staff to and from work, so that was an additional cost for them. And when we looked at shift systems, they had to double up on shift systems to make sure that they can keep the supply and demand for food. Because if we look at worldwide what is happening, every country is suffering. Somebody think it was Dunstan talk about shipping. What you would pay for $1,000 in bringing in a shipment of something is now $20,000. Shipping has quadrupled with regards to bringing in raw material. So things that we cannot find, and most of the manufacturers kept bearing that cost. But as I said to them a couple of weeks ago, there isn't much more you'll be able to do with it, because if you don't start passing on something from it, you will start feeling the pinch down the road. And I must say I am proud of them, because a lot of them, I think only one business had to retrench. Everybody else kept their staff all during COVID, helped them with regards to moving to and from home to get to work, because on a bus system where that you could only have 10 persons, they had to employ a driver to take their staff to work and back home in the evening. So we had to do some adjusting with regards to that, but a lot of it is cost and getting packaging material to come into the island. Other than that, I think with regards to supplying the food that we do, I didn't see, or I don't foresee any shortages right now, but cost will be a factor going forward. And I think this is what Massey is saying. If you look at what is going on with cost, food will get a little bit more expensive, because everything has quadrupled. Not just the ships, you also have the cost of the product. And the places that most persons order stuff from was out of China. That has become a serious threat for us, because a lot of their factories have switched into, instead of making, let's say, pet trays or something like that, they're now doing masks. They're doing something else, because that's the demand in their country. So for us, we have to find ways and innovative ways to make sure we have these persons on board, that we can get a second source of things that if we have to import. But I must say, within our sector, we have seemed to be able to, food-wise, keep what we're doing and having it stay healthy in the best way we can.
Mr. Faisal, the agri-exporters would definitely need to focus on getting their products out, and equally would have a voice in what is being discussed today. What is your input, and how has this affected your sector?
Thank you, and good morning to all, to viewers and listeners alike. Exporting in the agricultural sector has presented a fair amount of challenges, especially now in the COVID era. Traditionally, we knew bananas as taking up the lion's share of export. And in the years past, we had a few exporters exporting breadfruits to England and maybe a few to the States. But what we've seen now with bananas and the amount of farmers and production reducing, we've seen an increase of exporters emerging. Obviously, a gap was created and a lot of people saw an opportunity. So as it stands now, we have somewhere in the region of maybe 30 exporters doing their own thing, so to speak. So we export to the region, we export to Barbados, to Trinidad, to Antigua, St. Kitts, and the northern islands like St. Thomas. But we also export to the UK, Canada, and the US. Unfortunately, since the advent of COVID, you would appreciate a lot of countries had to close their borders. And as such, the issue of airlift has presented a lot of problems. So whereas we've continued, fortunately, in the region to continue shipping, because the ports have remained open in the region for food. So fortunately, we've continued to enjoy exporting to Barbados, to Trinidad, to Antigua, St. Kitts, and the Northern Caribbean. But for those who have been focused on producing or exporting to Canada in particular, the issue of airlift has been terrible. And for some of those exporters too, they have not exported for some time now. And the same is true for the States, and England to a lesser extent. We saw this year the mango season almost finishing, and the farmers and the exporters were not able to really take advantage of it. Although, I must add, the mango season this year was not as rich as it has been in previous years. We saw, unfortunately, a lot of our members have just had to, in some cases, switch to the region. We see a lot more exporters trying to put in their produce in the Barbados market, in the Antigua market, albeit on a small scale. Now, exporting in agriculture on the surface seems exciting, but it has its fair share of challenges. And we spoke and we heard earlier of small groups. If you are an exporter, you need to have a select group of people who will participate in your program and keep you supplied, because the business of marketing or exporting requires consistency, reliability outside of just quality. And this is a serious challenge, because whereas marketing is meant to stimulate agricultural production, to an extent you don't necessarily have fixed contracts with farmers who produce for you. So there is a tendency for a farmer, he may have a crop originally intended for you as the exporter, but might have gotten a better price from some other group. And out of him not having loyalty, can just go out of that box and sell out, and you now as the exporter cannot deliver to your customers at the other end. There is also the issue of quality. Unfortunately, and I admire what Massey is doing. Massey is playing a significant role in repositioning the mindset of the farmer to understand quality. Because outside of banana production, the banana farmer understood production and quality because the market demanded it. But it seemed for the small farmer who's doing the non-traditional crops, his attention is not so much focused on the quality, but the volume that generates the returns. So as exporters, we too have to grapple with the issue of grading, sorting, and ensuring that we meet up to the expectation of our customers. And that's a challenge for us. I must say though that to an extent, having established a relationship with a select group of farmers, it's inevitably the farmer would have to appreciate, if he is to continue doing business with you, he has to measure up to the requirements of the market. There is also the other aspect that there is a general feeling by farmers who believe that because you're exporting, you're earning bigger money. They understand the US value, they understand the pound, and in their minds, you are earning a lot more money. Unfortunately, the person who produces and sells locally is likely to make a bigger profit margin than the exporter. And the reason for that is because the exporter must comply to issues of packaging. And packaging is not an area the exporter does have any control over in terms of the cost. The cost of paper continues to go up all the time. And unfortunately, we don't, as exporters, we don't have a choice but to buy from Winera. And so the issue of price is always an issue for us, as far as we know we can source packaging material or components outside of Winera much cheaper. But we are locked in the Winera arrangement and must buy from Winera. So a case in point would be a farmer producing a box of bananas that he would sell maybe in the Barbados market $29 at max. But here he is having to pay packaging $7. Now that's just the packaging component. He has to pay the $7. He has to pay the transportation and other handling costs. But to the farmer, because he's selling overseas, he's making more money and they're demanding that you pay them more money. If you compare it with the farmer or the middleman who purchases plantains, for example, a perfect case in point is plantains. They would buy plantains maybe at $1. So you buy plantains from a farmer at $1. But you go down to our local market there, and 5 fingers of plantains is $5. Yeah. But how many plantains made up the $1? Okay, so, but with the exporter on the other hand, he doesn't, first, the local man did not, he probably put the plantain in a tray or a box he can recycle, and he ripens it, he goes to the market, he sells it, his profit margin is much greater than the exporter who has to pay the $7 for the packaged component but doesn't return it. It's not a recyclable component, so that cost doesn't return. And I'm saying that just to say that in as much as there is a place for your marketing outside of the Marcy arrangement, outside of the hotels, but still out there in the rural communities, there is still a great level of organizing to be done to be able to benefit and to keep the supplies consistent. Our agriculture is rain-fed. And by virtue of that fact, we don't always have control over the supplies. So this year, we have had a very unusual, an unusual rainfall pattern, and as such, with the storm coming in July, early July, we've seen our export business just falling flat on its face. I mean, we had a vessel coming out of Barbados every week. The vessel has had to resort to fortnightly, and now the vessel has been suspended because we don't have any supply going into the Barbados market. And the few bananas that we have available to export, it seemed more profitable to sell it locally.
Thank you. Your synopsis have uprooted sufficient crop for us to dive into the issue of filling more space in the St. Lucia's economic basket. I think the common link and thread between all of the sectors is agriculture and agriculture production. We have a panel that could take us from export and trade into diversification, the nutritional balance, food safety, and all of the aspects that could really bring this conversation to a nice summary or conclusion, an action plan as to where do we take agriculture. A major response to the changing external environment is the need to expand the boundaries of agriculture, from just farm and primary production to the value chain concept. As it relates to diversification, and persons from Marcy and the Ministry of Health, you would have spoken of wastage. But I'm asking, in terms of your observation and in terms of progress, what can be done to make the agriculture sector better? Ministry of Health, Agriculture, or Marcy stores, you could probably gauge your response towards that. What can be done to make the agriculture sector better?
All right. Thank you for that question, and thanks for all the useful opening insights shared by the colleagues. In order to move agriculture forward and to, of course, as the topic says, to fill more space, and I'm suspecting the idea here is to increase agriculture's contribution to gross domestic product. I think it has to continue. I shouldn't say start, but continue with more strategic thinking and strategic planning. Strategic partnerships, and of course strategic investments. What do we mean when we start this language of strategic? We're in an global plague, a pandemic as we call it, but that plague is just a small part of the story when compared to, as some of the colleagues have alluded to, the issue of climate change and having to adapt to climate change. Our strategies need to move along the line as to what it is that we could effectively and efficiently undertake within our 238 square miles. Agricultural development cannot be divorced from all the other developments. There's one truth about agriculture that has to be recognized at the highest policy making level, and that is about the amount of land space that is required for production. You have export, you have agro-processing, and a number of investments, opportunities that come off of agriculture, as they would say, backward and forward linkages. But all of these are hinged on the ability of the country to produce the primary products that are required. We need to start strategically looking at what available lands we have for agriculture, and to ensure that policies are set out that dictate that these lands remain for agricultural production now and into the future and for posterity. When we are able to do that, then we need to look at what sort of strategic investments that we are going to make. We've had support from Sustainable Development Department, for example, in developing a national adaptation plan. Climate change is for real. The reality of it and its impacts on agriculture is for real. And we need to ensure that agriculture is well prepared. And I'm happy to report that international agencies such as the Global Environment Facility, as we call it, GEF, UNDP, and the Adaptation Fund are making significant investments in our agriculture in a bid to make agriculture more resilient and to help the partners and the stakeholders to become more adaptive to climate change. We also have support from the Sustainable Development Department that help us to prepare what was called a strategic action plan for agriculture, for water, and for fisheries, I think. And essentially what these do is to provide a strategic framework within which we will make investments. These investments are necessary if we are going to adapt one, but of course also necessary to build a stronger, more resilient agriculture sector. In order for us to shift further, Ms. Edwin, we also need to look at issues of research and development. We're a small developing country, and we don't have the capacities that international agencies have. We used to have some capacity in the days of the Saint Lucia Banana Growers Association with WinBan and so on. We used to have a more active regional research agency in the place of CARDI, Caribbean Agriculture Research and Development Institute, but financing for some of these agencies have been reduced. And so we now need to ensure that we set up strategically and put policies in place to ensure that we undertake adaptive research, that we undertake research that allows us to look at what is happening globally and see if we could adapt it to our local scenario. That research and development has to be across the board. We talk about from farm to table or from soil to boil and a whole set of fancy conversations. All of it has to look at who are the input suppliers, who are the producers, who are the consumers, what do they need, how can we research and develop so that we provide consumers with the products that they need, farmers receive the inputs that they need, the marketing people receive the support that they need in terms of quality assurances. I mean, we have not even mentioned it, the issue of food safety is a huge area that we also need to continue strategizing. And so we're talking about strategic planning. How do we plan to ensure that all of these are considered? The land that is required, the investments that are required, the partnerships, the strategic partnerships. We have international agencies, we have friendly governments. So how do we partner with them to ensure that St. Lucia's agriculture could grow? Then we look at the strategic use of resources. Water management, for example. No agriculture without proper water management. No agriculture without labor management, as Mr. DeMille alluded to earlier on. Access to finance. Who are the people who are providing farmers with finances? We need to ensure that in the strategic conversation that all of these are lined up and that it's not too expensive, for example, to access finances, that the labor, we treat our labor supply fairly. I think up to about now, DeMille, if I'm correct, I think agriculture labor starts anywhere from $30 up to about 60, which is interesting because St. Lucia's minimum wage is somewhere around $25. So, I mean, we need to now ensure that we look at these issues and ensure that the people who are asked to come into agriculture to provide labor are getting proper returns. And of course, strategic investments. We cannot do it all. The things that are required to make agriculture more resilient, to make agriculture more competitive, both locally and internationally, we can't make all the investments overnight. And so we now have to sit with all the stakeholders. We're talking about the input suppliers, the producers, the traders, and so on, and say, what are the investments that we could undertake over time? What are the first steps we should take? What are the second, third, fourth, over the next 5 years, over the next 10 years? These conversations are really important if we are going to make sense out of the current status of our agriculture sector, if we are going to make strides that will send us in the right direction. We are very often reactive, and we need to move away from reactive responses to one where we actually strategize with partner agencies. Health is here, all these agencies are here, but it requires that sort of strategic thinking and put measures in place and then put mechanisms in place to evaluate periodically what we are doing, how impactful, how effective it is, and go back to the drawing table when the opportunity presents itself to ensure that we are on a path to ensure that agriculture is able to contribute more significantly to gross domestic product.
Well said. Collaboration seemed to be the way forward, and having those strategic plans in place. Marcy and the Ministry of Health, as it relates to this and wastage, how do you see us curbing this and ensuring that everything that is produced is utilized and ensuring that well-balanced plate? So factoring the wastage, and how do you see your sector making that difference?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think one of the things we need to really do is to have a really serious agricultural plan for Saint Lucia. Now that do not come without political will. The political will must be there so that we can move in a certain direction, right? I cannot help but understand that for us to move forward, we need what you call inclusiveness. We need to get the main players. A lot of times what I've seen happening, and not just in Saint Lucia, a number of places I've been to in terms of on agriculture forum, you find we come, we discuss things, and we bring farmers at the last minute. So it's like we're talking down to them, we're telling them what we think they should do, right? And I think some of the things that have really made us successful as a company is understanding some of the farmers in certain areas in Saint Lucia, right? They always tell you, you know, you could have whatever plan you have, and you don't understand the people's culture. You'll come out with a strategy and it will fail. So I think we need to include the farmers at the early stage of planning. And I know Kemal spoke about our land use policy. That's one we have to take serious, because when we drive around, we see the amount of land. We know when we were younger that was into agriculture, and now it's into other use. We have to take that serious if we're going to be serious about feeding ourselves. When you look at the annual CARICOM bill, you're talking about $5 billion US a year, you know, and we're talking about unemployment. So we have to look at some of those areas. We have to strengthen our farmers' organizations, because our farmers' organizations really need to be strengthening. All of us need to be speaking the same language. We need to be working towards the same goal and achieving it. One of our big issues, not just in Saint Lucia, in the Caribbean, is implementation. We know that we have a lot of nice plans, but when times to implement it, that's where we're falling short. The financial institutions have to come out and give the support. I mean, through dealing with our farmers, we saw the need to put a farmers loan program from 2010. We charge farmers no interest. And I could tell you, we have no really rate of delinquents. If I remember, it's one farmer owing us $44.45 from 2010 to now. So, you know, it's not that farmers not serious and they cannot pay.
I'll pay
you
that.
know?
I'll pay that.
We have to think of our schools too, because that mindset, that change we need, we have to start instilling it in the young people, right? We have to make agriculture sexy. They have to want to do it. But look at our ads on the television. What do you see? You see they advertise a bunker, he maybe have a nice car, walking into a nice car, a nice home. We have to let our kids know one crop can give them that nice car. One good crop can give them that nice car.
It's true.
And we need to continue. I know Marcy and Ika is in the HOOPS program, helping out our primary and secondary school, where we supported the schools with greenhouses and a lot of agricultural equipment, and we buy everything they can produce that meet our standard. So, and that's why I'm talking about the inclusiveness. We need innovation for the young people. The fork and the spade and the pickaxe do not attract them, right? So we need to get over that. We also need targeted production. There are a lot of low-hanging fruits that we need to start paying attention to. If we remember through a few years ago, maybe I was in the sector, maybe I was in the hotel sector at that time, but we used to export pineapples. But now, Marcy alone, I don't even want to tell you the amount of cases of pineapples we bring in on a weekly basis. So there are low-hanging fruits. The amount of carrots, and those are things we know that can be produced in Saint Lucia. So I think we need to have that serious roundtable discussion where we bring all the challenges, where we hear from the farmers. Like, I mean, COVID come, we couldn't do that, but persons who used to attend our meeting, like this gentleman right next to me and Kwame over there, would remember every year we did that, where we come to our farmers, we say, guys, this is how we did, this is where the opportunities are, this is where we think you should be putting your energy, what are the challenges you have to achieve some of those things? And we work together to overcome the challenges. And next year when we show slate, we always see an improvement. So I think we can work together and deal with a lot of the issues we have in the agricultural sector. But let's not lose focus that there's a lot of opportunity. And the way I think we can go further is together. So the mindset have to change.
Mindset has to change.
The mindset have to change. We have to have an inclusive sector. We have to get people involved. Because people is who will make things happen.
And as you emphasize, the youth, the involvement of the youth would definitely place us in that position. There is need to speak of wastage, and the Ministry of Health, you could probably tie this in nicely for us. And how can agriculture supply these nutritional elements that are lacking?
Okay, I'm going to agree with Mr. Demille that we need a comprehensive approach in dealing with the issues that is at hand right now. But speaking from a nutritional standpoint, we need to make agriculture more what you call nutrition sensitive. There must be a very strong link between health and agriculture because, like I said before, this is where we get our food. And for us to live healthy lives, for us to live active lives, we need to have healthy food. How do we get that healthy food? Is from agriculture. And it is actually a cycle. We get the healthy food from agriculture if we are using healthy practices. And then from that food, we get our energy, we get our nutrients that will prevent us from getting diseases. And so when we are healthier, what happens? We have the energy and we are healthy, we are able to go into a healthy workforce, to go back into that same field. Well, I use field as agriculture, but I'm talking about everything else. So you go back and you're able to work. So it is a cycle. It's a healthy cycle. So we need agriculture to be more nutrition sensitive. The practices that are used in terms of making the food safe and healthy, you want to ensure that we minimize the use of pesticides, chemicals that can have adverse effects on health, because it doesn't make sense that we produce food and we don't take into consideration these things, and then the foods that we are consuming are actually not safe. And so that can lead to chronic diseases and other health conditions, cancers, etc., because we know pesticides and these things can cause disease. So you want to ensure that the way the food is produced is safe, or the minimal use of chemicals, stuff like hormones, antibiotics into our foods. These things are very serious and can affect our health. So in ensuring that, we want to ensure that the food is safe, and so we will be able to be healthier, to have a healthier workforce.
Ms. Edwin, if I might, just to piggyback on what my colleague from Health, the issue of food safety has been flagged, and I want the audience to bear in mind that this is a cold chain, a value chain. Several descriptors are used to explain that food process from the farm to the table. And along that chain, the responsibility of the producers is essentially to produce a safe product. So the pesticide use, the use of hormones in the case of livestock and so on, we need to keep awareness of that. But very importantly, the food that usually gets onto the table has gone through a process. It has gone through a cold chain of storage. Fish, bad fish sometimes is usually because of a breach in that process. So we need to ensure that those cold chains are maintained.
Yes.
And also those persons who process. Very often a processed item is what ends up in the dish. So we need to ensure that our processors are up to speed in terms of safety standards, to ensure that whatever additives and so on that are added or used in the processing cycle is up to human safety standards, as part of reduction of waste and so on. And I also want to admonish my colleague from health to encourage homeowners to avoid seeing food. You know, one of the biggest challenges, we're talking about food availability and all that, but if we keep putting too much on that plate and dumping it, food dumping is a huge problem that cannot be controlled by producers, processors, and anybody else. This is a home determination. What can we effectively consume? What is effectively required for our home, household, and to minimize wastage in terms of putting too much on that plate, particularly when we go to fetes, parties, feasts, and so on. The tendency is there to waste a lot. So these are some of the areas that we need to pay attention to, which may not necessarily be directly correlated to agriculture itself. Thank you.
Yes, very good point. Wastage. You can have wastage in different ways, and that's a very good point. You know, we tend to think that we need so much food than our body actually requires. We are not as active as we used to be, and so the amount of food that we require for our bodies to function optimally is much less. And so this is why a lot of people become overweight and obese, because we are consuming too much. So that's a very good point. You know, we are in the times where people are losing their jobs. COVID has changed everything for us, where even us going, Ministry of Health going to the schools to educate the children on, you know, how to eat healthy, etc., having health fairs, going to workplaces. All this has been put to a halt because of our current situation with COVID. And so what you find happening is that persons are more inactive, especially the children who are at home currently doing homeschooling, so they are inactive, and so they are putting on weight. And you have persons who have lost their jobs, again, they also are less active, and that can be a recipe for weight gain. So how can we now prevent this? So cutting back on your plates, the amount of food that is on your plate, because sometimes the food on the plate can actually serve for 2 days. You know, so this is a way of reducing food wastage. And also on the agriculture standpoint, what I have seen is because our foods are seasonal, I see, you know, our local farmers at the market, and so it breaks my heart to see sometimes they have ripe plantain or certain foods that, you know, avocado is in season right now, and you know this avocado will not last for the next 2 days, but they refuse to reduce the price and prefer to throw it out. You know, so these things actually hurt my heart, because I can understand, yes, you work hard for you to get your food and you want your money, but instead of throwing it out, you know, put it lower price so somebody who doesn't have a high income can afford it. So this is another form of wastage. When we have seasonal foods, the market is flooded with it, and so you have wastage. A couple of months after, the food is not there. So we need to minimize wastage. And we are a small country, and we can be sustainable in the food that we produce. But we have we have to change the mindset. We have to change the way we do things. We have to change the amount of food that we consume. For most of us is cutting back, and so our dollar can stretch, our food can stretch, and so our health can be improved.
Definitely well said. And as it relates to wastage, adding value to that product, so something you have a lot of today, you could find a way to preserve it, to freeze it, to find a way to add value and make that product even last you even longer. So definitely some thoughts to bear in mind. And having a balanced meal is extremely important. You don't want it to go to waste, but in some sectors you would have, in terms of production and agriculture, these sectors we might be seeing wastage. In other sectors like livestock, where our import bill, as the doctor has indicated, this still remains high, and so we still need to import. I would like you to speak to what can we do in the poultry sector to meet the needs of our country, or any other livestock. What can we do to meet the needs of our country so we could reduce this import bill? And have we pursued rabbit production and things to that? Could you speak to that?
Thank you, Ms. Edwin. Before I go into that, I just want to add, though, Mr. DeMille was speaking to youth involvement in agriculture. And what I've noticed recently is an upsurge in the number of young persons actually calling and inquiring about livestock production. They have really creative ideas, innovative ideas, that they want to go into. I got a call recently regarding natural gas and production, biogas, sorry, thank you for that, and other calls in terms of new breeds of goats. And they have ideas. They have creative, innovative ideas that they want to implement. But one of the biggest constraints is financial, that financial support to help them start off. Yeah. Because a lot of these sectors, the initial investment is high. That initial capital is needed to start off. You're looking at poultry, for example. To build a poultry pen, there's a cost factor involved that many persons are not able to meet. So that support, that financial support mechanism is necessary, is needed. And you find it difficult for banks to give that loan to farmers because of the high risk involved. And so, especially for livestock, that financial support is necessary. Another factor that we need to look at, and was mentioned earlier, is that issue of land availability. And our livestock farmers especially are being tremendously impacted, and that again will constrain and bring down productivity for livestock farmers, because the land space that was available many years ago is no longer available. So where in the past you would see acres, and you would see, and I'm sure you can think of it, picture it now, lots of heads of cattle roaming and wandering in the pastures. You can't see that anymore because of that space has now been taken over by whether it be hotels, whether it be residential areas, and so our livestock farmers are being pushed aside. So farmers now, livestock farmers need to develop more sustainable practices. Practices that allow us to use a minimal space but increase productivity. So our methods and our the types of production systems that we implement need to change because of the changing dynamics in the whole land availability, as well as the impact of climate change, the impact of larceny, dog predation. So for example, now you will see sheep and goat farmers develop, we encourage them to build pens, build structures in the house, and therefore you can increase the number of animals that you produce under a smaller space. Now that in itself brings other complications. You have high intensive production now. You have to now be very careful, look at food safety, you look at animal welfare issues. So there's a change in dynamics in the way livestock production is done. And you also have to do that in a sustainable manner, ensuring that the environment is safeguarded. So we have all of these dynamics in play. And in terms of, for example, you mentioned the poultry sector. Again, we have that high demand for poultry. We have seen the processors put in that thrust and publicize and promote the local product. And we have seen an increasing demand for the local product over the years. Cost is still a major factor. So our processors need support in terms of how do we bring down the cost of production. And one of the major costs of production for our processors is the cost of feed. And so there are major cost factors that are a problem. We need to look at how we can bring down those costs of production. And so increase production, but decrease the cost for the consumer. Because our local population, they want to eat more local chicken. They prefer the fresh product, they prefer the local product. They know that it is free of antibiotics and other chemicals. And so they rather eat it, but again, the cost is a factor. You mentioned rabbit production is another area. However, again, rabbit production, there's a high cost involved as well. Cost of a rabbit feed is high. And we need to build that. There's not so much of that demand for the rabbit. It's more seasonal. So at certain times of the year, you might see an increase in demand for rabbit meat, Creole festivals, and such alike. So we need to build that local demand for that product. So we have several dynamics, and one of the things that we're working and we need to develop, and it has been mentioned before, is a policy to guide the agricultural sector. And this is one of the things that we're doing at my department, the Veterinary and Livestock Services Division, is we're working now with consultants. We received a grant from CDB. We have consultants working with us to develop a comprehensive livestock policy for the sector and master plan in consultation with our stakeholders, our farmers, to develop that policy to guide the sector and a master plan to guide the sector, because that is severely lacking to help move the sector forward. I'm not sure if I looked at all the questions you asked.
You have, and you indicated that there definitely needs some shift, as high production costs could move us in that direction to meeting the needs of our country. So as much as we may want to reduce the import bill, there is some internal factors such as the high cost that you mentioned that needs to be looked at and sorted out for those livestock producers. From the manufacturers and agri-exporters' point of view, we've heard of the wastage and things like bananas, apart from it being used as a fruit. Is there anything else that can bring value? Are the agri-exporters or manufacturers looking at that? Sweet potato, for example, is another example. Are you finding your manufacturers or even the agri-exporters, are they sending these out? And what do you think can be done with those?
At present, we have quite a lot of persons doing chips, and they're actually exporting. We have plantain, we have bananas, sweet potato, we're down to dasheen, we've seen ripe and green plantain. I love the sweet potato because it's phenomenal. So when you look at where we are with regards to the agro-processing, we have a number of persons who do that sort of processing. Again, there is a shortage of that type of product. Ripe plantain, green plantain, they may take weeks and they cannot get anything. Some of them have gotten niche markets in Martinique, Barbados, St. Vincent, Grenada. They export a quantity. But with what's happening now with regards to the fruits and crops, it is a challenge for some of them. I look at innovation. They have been very innovative in trying to get things done in a quickly and don't have as much wastage, because you'll find them going in on a Sunday. When most people are at home, the manufacturers are working because they cut their vegetables, they cut their fruits, they freeze it, because in the next 2 weeks, there'll be no plantains, there'll be no breadfruit. So they have to learn to process and freeze. Process, pulp, and freeze. So they do a lot of that in the processing sector within manufacturing. So a lot of people will not understand, hey, but we don't have any breadfruit in season, but I'm getting chips, because they process and freeze. And I think that's something that they all learn to do for them to be able to survive with what they're doing with regards to chips and that sort of thing. They have to do a lot of pulp and freeze. And then you have the other, we speak of poultry. There's no wastage anymore. Before, you never saw chicken feet in the supermarket. Now there is huge demand for chicken feet. A chicken only have 2. But people seem to think that when Massey called for X amount of kilograms of feet, there is none. So, and nobody gets to understand, remember the chicken has 2. So even though you plan ahead, you still have X amount of birds, and it's still 2 you're getting per bird. So the demand for every part of a chicken right now is huge. Every part of the chicken. So there is no wastage, except, well, I wouldn't even consider it wastage, because some of the things that they remove from a bird, a live bird, it's now fed to the pigs. So there is no wastage in that aspect with regards to processors in that part of the thing. What is killing them is the price of their packaging. Because when you look at having to package, you package in a fresh product, you cannot put it in any biodegradable paper package. It folds, it breaks. Because you're doing fresh stuff, so there's some water left back when you finish with the process. You put it on a meat pad, but you will still have some water. So you have to have something that's sturdy enough to hold a processed chicken. That's poultry. When we look at the chips, we have to freeze, as I say, to make sure that you can continuously sell your product and have it on the market. People don't understand that this is from a process. They just figure, oh, well, yes, we can get sweet potato, we can get plantain chips, but there's a process. And the demand is high for that type of food right now. We're seeing it a lot with regards to our small manufacturers. We have a lot of micro people that manufacture, 1 and 2. Even with that, We have to get them out of their home. They cannot process and expect to sell things out there from a home. So you have to get the space to operate in where you will make sure you work within the standards, because you have to work within a standard to do food. Food is something that must have a standard. We insist that everybody that process have to follow the local health standards, and that's why we have to work closely with the ministry to make sure that everybody's doing what they have to do. Whereas it's easy for people to just import something, there's nobody looking, but health has to come in, Ministry of Agriculture have to come in to make sure what they're doing is correct, so that when we get it to the supermarket, we know that there is a standard and they maintain that standard. So for us, cost will always be an issue with regards to local production, because packaging alone is where you may have to spend that much more money than something that's been imported.
Agri-exporters, any input on?
Okay. As far as wastage would be concerned here, exporters would really be concerned with surplus supplies. As we stand now, there is no wastage as far as it relates to the export, because it's the lack of availability. But I wish to just share a few points on as it relates to production and the issue of productivity. My colleague from the Ministry of Agriculture presented the plan as far as how we can be strategic in reposition in agriculture. But then the reality on the ground is so different. It's so different to the perspective that he presented. And surely, to move it forward, you really need to operate it from that perspective. But when you look at the issues of land use policy, as he mentioned, as we speak, we have thousands of acres of land that's abundant. Bananas is no longer active. You have a lot of land. You just don't have anybody to take advantage of those lands, because really and truly the succession for agriculture is a big issue. Who's going to, I mean, a lot of the farmers' children are now professionals, and they're not necessarily attracted to bananas. I mean, there are some who would still take it on because they understand that there are benefits to be derived from it. But the truth about it is that our agriculture is not likely to move so far, and it's unfortunate that I am prepared to make that bold statement, because I'm seeing the reality out there. Okay, for example, we speak of being innovative. It's okay to give lip service to a lot of the thoughts that can help change the dynamics on the ground. But the truth of the matter is, okay, for example, land preparation. I mean, we see construction, we see so many excavators on island, we see so many heavy equipments on island, and it's all focused in construction. The reality is, what is happening for agriculture? What kind of equipment that's available for helping people to do land preparation, in drainage? I mean, there are lots of equipment around that can be used to upgrade and help farmers produce in a more commercial way. Our farmers are still in a subsistent mindset because of the fact that land preparation and its reality doesn't lend itself for them to open up in a bigger way. And that's what's happening. I mean, the ministry does have equipment, but to what extent is it utilized, and how many people are really realistically benefiting from it? Okay, we have the land use policy again. The issue of land use we have known from the 80s, from the 70s. I go to meetings and I hear of land use policy. But we are in the 2021, and the reality is land use policy is still a feature, and we don't seem to have any documentation that speaks to how do we move from that point to the other level. How? Young people, land tenure is an issue. Land tenure is an issue. A lot of families in rural communities own lands. They're not dismembered. Issue of succession. There are still issues where the dominant figurehead in the family would dominate the lands, even if younger people may want to have access to it. It is not always possible. And that locks them into the fact that they don't have access to finance. They cannot mortgage land to get monies to invest in agriculture. And so all of these are serious stumbling blocks to what the reality is on the ground. And I honestly believe at this stage, labor in agriculture need to be trained. Labor in agriculture can no longer remain ad hoc because a man couldn't get a security work in Castries or another work somewhere and he's in the savannah, so to speak. You take him to do a work for you. And he's so handicapped. He's functionally illiterate. And you have to pay him the day, but you didn't get the day work out of him. That's the exchange of the service. So really and truly, how can a farmer become efficient if the labor he employs doesn't even understand the responsibility they have to exchange the service for the money that the farmer is paying? And these are the realities we have on the ground, folks. And I sit here and I'm interacting with it. So I cannot sit here without speaking about it. The reality is rough out there. Okay, so we still need our government to create the enabling environment at the different levels to cause certain things to happen. The small rural community, and I heard farmer organizations, which is a very important situation to consider. But do you know, a lot of farmer organizations don't succeed because of basic infighting among its leadership. And we see that over the years, farmer organizations that could have stood and thrive and be successful and help their members to grow just collapse overnight. So we have a lot of issues to look at, folks, and I just thought, really and truly, I needed to highlight it. I honestly believe farm labor, you need to, just like you have the skills program, you need to organize in rural communities, in the resource centers that exist in rural communities, very informal classes that bring people who are available to come together, young, able-bodied men from the ghetto hanging out, cooling out, doing nothing, to come together and understand that there is a place for them. We need to tap in the potential that they have by creating that enabling environment to facilitate that process. We have a lot of trained people in agriculture who can really do a lot more than we're seeing on the ground. And that's my understanding of the situation.
We do have a virtual audience, and we do have an audience before us. I'm sure there are burning questions from both platforms, and so we will open it up. I do know the panel, you too have questions or points that you would want to raise, and definitely we will get back to you. But to give our listening audience and virtual audience an opportunity to engage, ask questions, and give their perspective. So we will open up the virtual or whichever comes first.
Okay, so Glenn Simon, I'm really impressed with the last presenter because this is exactly what has been irking me for a while. I have land, and I've been trying to enter the agricultural field, and I've been speaking with the Ministry of Agriculture about what sort of crop I could go into and how. But you're so correct. It's so expensive to start preparing your land. I mean, I was trying to just operate just a half acre before I move into the other acres that I have. And to just do a half acre is almost $6,500 to move some big boulders off, because there's so much land space being occupied by the boulders that you really, for you to maximize it, you need to clear it. And that was a deal that the guy was giving me at that price. So that's before I planted anything. And how do you get new persons to enter the industry so that they could add, because the topic is really how we could make agriculture have a bigger stake in this economic basket, and more persons with the means, with the land, can't seem to enter properly because it is so high to enter. And I agree with you. One of the hardest things also is getting persons that you could trust as labor to work the land. So I don't know if this panel has any solutions for this, because you have a lot of people with lands just prefer to let bush occupy it than to actually do a meaningful activity on the land. So what is the solution to this?
If I might jump in for just a minute, the issue of training of labor, one of the OECS skills, I think it's CVQ they call it, right. So we've had a huge number of persons who've been provided with those base skills required if you want to call it agricultural labor 101. Along with that, we had a few years ago, somewhere around the 2014 or thereabout, a farm labor system in which those, I think it must have been some close to 50 or 60 persons were trained at that level and were sent to provide support to the farming community. As we speak, there is also the emerging revisiting of that farm labor system, and training will be provided at the CVQ level for those persons. So hopefully that will help to provide some sort of support. In terms of getting into the agricultural sector, in terms of land preparation and so on, it is always advisable to consult with the department and its technicians when a person is deciding to do so. Because, for example, the land capability, the capability of the land in terms of what is possible, it's good to get advisories, because you may decide on a particular line of investments that may not be best suited for the capability class of the lands that you have. So it's advisable that you interact with the, and the Department of Agriculture has an engineering section, an extension advisory section, crop protection section, livestock section. So all these persons could come and provide you with an overall view as to what may be the best direction in terms of investments for your particular situation. That is the starting point I would recommend. Rather than trying to remove boulders, where you should actually be calling Wheel Rock to start off before going to agriculture.
But if I just may, I did what you recommended. I actually went to the extension office and tried to find out. And when you inquired about what sort of assistance is there for a new farmer, it's really you're on your own. There's no equipment that agriculture could actually start off with. And I was thinking, if it is that for a new entrant, you could say, we go into this sort of arrangement where I'm going to a particular crop that you have advised me to go into, you know the returns on it, and you've seen where my land is. If it is that the ministry would be able to help clear that land with some sort of arrangement that when you sell a crop, you're actually paying back. So you don't have that huge upfront cost. That would have been an incentive for persons. But it is, you starting on your own, everything is really you to make it work. So I actually did what you did, but I didn't find the ministry giving that hand holding that you really require as a new person, probably not knowing much about agriculture yourself. So I think it is, if there is an office that is able to say this is for new farmers, new entrants, persons with available land, how we could get them to be more interested in utilizing.
Maybe what I can do is just tell you of what I saw in Ethiopia. What they did, they created a group of farmers, and what they wanted to achieve is the farmers to ensure that they did all the, how I would put it, correct farm practices, collection of data so they could get loans and whatnot. And once they meet the requirements, it gave them access to become a group member. Now, when they became a group member, they got access to the equipment the group have. So I know we have donor agencies, we haven't looked in that kind of direction. Maybe that's something we should be looking at now. How can we create that entity that will give that support? But you would have to meet the requirements, which would show how serious you are as a coming farmer, to meet all what, because we need we need a change of what we're doing, because what we're doing obviously not taking us to where we want to go. And I think I saw that in Ethiopia, and I was very impressed with what I saw. So they took climate change, everything into consideration, and you had certain things you have to meet, certain criteria you have to meet to get access to the resources.
Along with that, just very briefly, we have some private sector partners who have come on board in two areas, cocoa and coffee. What they've essentially done is identified persons who are interested in the cultivation of these crops, and these private sector persons, they have market access. So they've essentially said, look, if you give access to the land, we provide you with planting material, we assist you in establishing these crops, and then we provide you with a market arrangement. So that is a model that perhaps can be scaled up in terms of the diverse number of crops moving forward. So that new entrants like yourself, there's a guaranteed market, so the investments, of course, will pay off in due course.
We have another question on the floor, and our virtual listeners, feel free to raise your hand to ask any questions you may have. Do go ahead.
Thank you. Just one comment. Before I begin, let me just commend the panel on the conversation so far. I think we need to encourage it and have a lot more discussion, but I think we need to include the farmers at the rural level a bit more in the conversation. I think there's one other aspect that we need to take into consideration, the aspect of risk. From the point of view of recovery of a farm system and the point of view of entrance into a new system. True. We need to have that conversation. If you let's look at the banana industry. In the past year and a half, the current position of the banana industry is from a direct impact of the climate change or the weather on them. And the farmers, frankly, have not had the ability or they do not have the money or the finances to put back into the system. So we need to have that conversation, be whatever enterprise it may be, and look at the farming system and work with the farmers and to determine what is the required support. It need to be a little more directed so that the farm could get back into operation. So it needs to be a little more focused. Thank you.
Thank you for that input.
I want to add to add to what the gentleman Glenn Simon was saying. I'm not sure if you spoke to the engineering department in terms of support for land preparation. The ministry actually has an agricultural engineering division that does that sort of work, land preparation. They have the equipment to do that sort of work. But as you said, there is a cost factor. And this is one of the reasons why we've always advocated the creation or formation of farmers groupings or farmers associations. Unfortunately, as our colleague has said, our farmers associations don't have a healthy history. They seem to always have some kind of never seem to work out even in the long run. But the idea with the farmers associations is that they offer that support to their members. So for example, with our swine groups, what we advocated was they come together, they build that sort of finance base where they have those monies, they can import on behalf of their members and sell to the members at a reduced cost. So they can offer that sort of support, that they form a cooperative. And this is what we've always advocated. The ministry can only do so much. Our budget at the ministry is very limited, unlike other ministries, and I need to add that. But so we are constrained in what we can do. We offer that support, but there's only so much we can do. So we advocate that the farmers come together. Build yourself as a group. There's strength in numbers, and we've seen it in Latin American countries. Cooperatives are strong. They have that ability to do a lot for their members. So as you come together, you can bring in the heavy equipment. You have it. You can't purchase it as an individual, but you can purchase it as a group, and you loan to your members. So you loan or you rent as a lease at a reduced cost. So you gain some finances as a cooperative, as a group, but the members also gain. So that is what we've advocated a lot. Unfortunately, the mindset sometimes, but we're still optimistic that it can happen in the long run.
So thank you for that input, and we do have another person on the floor with a question.
Just before, if you don't mind, in terms of the risk that my colleague across mentioned, again, tying in risk and coming together in groups. In the heyday of bananas, you had BG and so on, you had wind crop. It was essentially an insurance mechanism that allowed a small deduction, an insignificant deduction that allowed coverage for wind damage. Then you have the livelihoods protection program. I remember, I think it was in 2013, government of Saint Lucia made a purchase of certain packages from that particular facility, and when the disaster happened, there was available resources. But beyond providing this risk and safety nets, all participants along the value chain need to ensure that there is proper management of the resources. As we speak, government is spending $5 million post-ELSA recovery. if we were to do an assessment by January 2022, we might be surprised what happens with those financial resources that are being placed into the sector. So I think when we do make these investments, there needs to be a mechanism in place to do follow-up, to see how these resources have been utilized to help in the recovery effort. Thanks.
Thank you for that.
Well said.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Majid Lawrence, Managing Director of my own small company, which is JR Farms, which will be going into composting. And it's funny that you guys would mention wastage, throughout the entire presentation. Just to touch base on the insurance, I just wanted to say that I think a lot of the farmers, especially those who are not operating on a loan, for example, and just starting off on their own piece of land, don't take it on their own to actually go ahead and insure their property or insure their farms. And I think that is one step that we have to do as far as the government, educate people on insuring, their own investment. So that's one thing. Another thing is that I was part of the swine farmer school. I don't know if you could recall my face, but and we always spoke about coming together and trying to work on stuff like that. But then again, it's the mindset. And I think if we don't have someone in charge who can actually elaborate on that, like I always say, when it comes to other fields that I actually invest my time into, education is key. I think if we don't show people the value of actually going into cooperating together, then they're not going to do it. You find like farmers, for example, and I think if we can remember that some farmers would come in at a lower rate than other farmers, and then all of a sudden the market is just changing, only because everyone is trying to sell, especially when times are hard. So that is one place that we tend to suffer, and I think the government or the ministry should be putting something in place to actually ensure that we have proper price control, because I did start off with farming, swine farming. I did very well, if you can recall, when we did the swine farmer school. I started my farm right there and there as a young person. I went about it the right way. My farm was very impressive. My pigs were not eating garbage. I can tell you that. Yes, I'll tell you. My pigs were not eating garbage. My pigs were getting well taken care of. Yet, it would cost me, but I couldn't get the dollar value that in return. So you find yourself in a position where maybe larger companies, not to mention names, would not want to purchase from you because your pricing, would not help them and their profit margins. And that's understandable because they're getting better offers elsewhere, right? I can remember approaching people and they say, hey, we can see what you're doing, but we're getting a better deal elsewhere. You understand? So that is one thing. And also, as far as, us being able to provide 25%, of the products or the input that we're getting locally, and then still having to import 75% and talking about growth, maybe that's growth, but for someone just coming into agriculture, you thinking that you're in a tropical island and things supposed to be at a higher level, and then you find out coming to one of these seminars that, okay, we had 25%. You're like, okay, wow, what are we in right now? And I'm sorry, guys, this is not a question, it's just my input. The small farmers could take up a lot of that. We find a lot of the bigger farmers doing this, but if we were investing more time into the smaller farmers, the youth, for example, like what is going to encourage me to leave school for, to do farming? I heard the gentleman mention, okay, the pay grade is between $30 to $60, daily, right? Like, how is that going to encourage me? How is that going to encourage me to leave what I'm doing right now, right? To go into farming. You find like there are call centers growing in Saint Lucia, foreign investors coming in and trying to, well, I don't use the term lowball, but for us it sounds like a lot, someone going in, you're getting $2,000 a month. You'd go into it, in that with farming, you'd never make that amount, but then again, the investors, the foreign investors are, pulling in majority of the youth right now, whereas we're not able to go ahead and invest our own time into it, because I'm thinking, okay, why would I invest my time into that, as much as I have a passion for it, when I also have my own livelihood to think of, right? So that is one of the things that I wanted to touch base on. As far as the representative to the far left mentioning that, we have to be realistic and talk about the land as well that's available we have a lot of, I've been searching for land for over 10 years. I can tell you I've been to Invest Saint Lucia. I've been to all of the places that, as soon as I raise this question, one of you might come to say, hey, well, you could do this, you could go there, and then you go to Prod and they tell you search for the land yourself. You go to Invest Saint Lucia, they show you all pieces of land, and then months later tell you, okay, we got it for someone else. You understand? And I've been through that over the course of 10 years. And the fact that I'm here today is a testament that we are trying. I've started this from 18. We are trying as youth to come into agriculture, and we're just not getting the assistance. I'm not even asking for assistance. I was more than willing to pay. Well, where do I get the land? You have a lot of people who are like from the older generation who have the lands. They have the lands, and they maintain that we're not selling the land. Some of them don't want to lease the land. Some of them think of, okay, this is for my grandchildren, my grandchildren, my grandchildren. All of the grandchildren are already overseas living their lives, right? And here we are, where we have governments in place, where you have a position where every 5 years you have to try to get in early, like I'm doing right now, because by the next 5 years, whatever I have planned right now, whatever you guys could approve for me right now, it will change 5 years, and then if I don't get it kicked off before then automatically it would stop by the time another government comes into play. And we have the lands available. One solution, the government could retain the lands, purchase the lands, and then reinvest it into the youth. You understand? That is one solution. And I find that I've been to a couple of these meetings, and we always have these meetings. And then the gentleman to the far right mentioned that we have to do a round table. I thought this was the round table. I thought this is what we're already doing. And every time I go to these meetings, we are at a point where, hey, well, let's go ahead and do something in the future. We are here now, right? We are here now. Let's find. And I'm very passionate about it. I'm trembling right now because we are here right now, and we're not trying to find a solution. We keep saying, okay, let's set up a meeting for a solution. Let's set up a meeting for a solution. And this has been years in the making, and I'm coming to these meetings every time. This is the first time that I'm actually getting a chance to speak. I'm still doing everything on my own, and I'm trying to grow my composting business. A lot of what we're throwing away, I pass on the side of the road, there's grass in bags, and we throw it away, and it causes a hazard for our environment, when you burn these things, whereas we could turn them back into usable nitrogen, high nitrogen compost. We have seaweed, which is high, potash and phosphorus, which we can combine, which is what I'm working on, which could generate fertilizers, natural fertilizers, going back to the health aspect of things, where it doesn't start from the plant that is already there. It starts from the soil. You understand? And we're not taking a lot of these things serious, and I want to be, my goal is to come out and, become sort of an ambassador for the youth, showing them exactly what I went through. And maybe if I can turn it around and allow them not to go through the same things that I went through over the past 10 years, with the help of the new plans that we have right now, maybe we can take it from there. But I can tell you guys that it is not easy for the youth. It's the difference between, I work in the hotel industry, it's the difference between having a honeymoon and an anniversary, vacation. A honeymooner would come in and they would think that, hey, I want the world for my honeymoon, and then cannot afford it and have to settle. Whereas anniversary, years down the road, when you develop some form of, cash, and you already made yourself, then you can be successful and you can have that kind of honeymoon in the future. But if we had someone who could invest it in us, very early, we could make it happen. And some of us not even asking for an investment. We're already working, in these industries that I just spoke about earlier, making $2,000, up to $6,000 a month. And that's, and you say, okay, why would you want to leave that for agriculture? But that is what I have a passion for, and that is what's going to help our environment, our whole community grow. 25% is nothing for us to be proud about. I can say that 25% is nothing for us to be proud about as far as producing locally. As far as packaging and whatnot, I want to touch base on that and being innovative. we have ways that we can actually make our product stand out on the shelf. It comes down to marketing, what people are looking for, doing your market research and making sure you have something that's attractive on the shelf. And that is one thing that I want to focus on as well. As far as going and export as well, we can make more money exporting. The fact that we have to settle for, the packaging that we have right now, that is the difference. We could get our product out of Saint Lucia where it could go straight to the table in the US or wherever, right? Whereas it's going to go through another processing where it has to go up there, then they gotta break it down and then put it into another form of packaging. We can do it here, by bringing it in bulk. Coming together and doing it together and bringing it in bulk, it would cost us less. But who do we have that's managing these things? Who do we have that's actually thinking of these things and thinking of the youth as well? Like this program, how many young people are actually going to see this? Like, are we thinking of this? Are we thinking of how we're going to get this on Instagram, YouTube, Facebook? How are we going to get the young people into this? Who's thinking about being more modern? I see, I'm going into these meetings every single time, and I see we speak about things that, farmers that have been there for generations, to benefit of or to kind of understand where you're coming from. But then how are we taking it to the table of the youth coming up and saying, hey, it could make sense for you? Just like saying that, hey, we have these guys with the suits and ties and the advertisements that you were speaking about earlier. You could be a farmer with your suit and tie and have an entire firm, working for you. What about the modern farms? We have indoor farms as well. What about these things which could provide, a better structure for safety against, hurricanes and whatnot? And we are in a tropical island. Who's thinking of that? Where we are prone to hurricanes. What about the indoor facilities that we could create? Who's thinking of that? You understand? So that is what I wanted to kind of drop on. I was a little bit disappointed that we didn't have someone on the table to represent the youth, but I was glad that the representative from Massey started the youth, topic. But I feel like we should have someone, coming on behalf of the youth and saying, hey, how are you going to approach this? How are you going to take this to the table of the youth right now? There's much more that I could say, but I know that we have to leave. And someone else would have to take the mic. But thanks for having me, guys, again. And
Thank you, and such a valuable contribution. And even when you made the point in terms of the reality and economic hardship versus quality and quantity and what that market would purchase, it really boils down to what is at stake for the youth, and you've just added your voice to this discussion. So thank you so much for that valuable contribution.
Right, thank you.
I was just going to briefly comment on some of his inputs, and a number of persons have alluded to the issue of cooperatives. The truth about cooperatives in our part of the world, and perhaps globally, is that you have charismatic leaders, which is what you're suggesting. Who's going to take charge? You have charismatic people who come on board, and over time they take advantage of vulnerability and timidity of farmers, and they kill it, which is what is happening to most of our cooperatives. Our Bellevue cooperative is shut down, as you would know. And the issue is about keeping people accountable. Cooperatives are run by the farmers and producers and processors, but there's lack of accountability. In terms of youth, you probably would have heard of the YEP, the Youth Agri-Entrepreneurial Project. Millions of dollars spent, but perhaps our challenge was the selection process. And so you have people who got involved and just wasted it. I mean, they wasted livestock pens, they wasted a whole bunch of stuff, but we could talk about afterwards. And of course, the issue of land access. Landowners are our biggest destroyers. We recently had few years ago, a huge problem at Black Bay because the farmers wanted freehold of the land. But you know what's going to happen when you give certain people freehold of land or ownership? They're going to sell it to the highest bidder in 5 years. And so we now need to look at the whole issue of ensuring that people don't get freehold of agricultural land, but leases. And at the end of the lease, the land is returned and that sort of stuff. But there are new and exciting ways of looking at it. Hopefully we could continue to see how we could implement those ideas moving forward. Kwame?
Promise to be brief. And as he was talking, I was saying that maybe he should have been added to the panel so that he could have shared his thoughts. But I just want to take a step back. You made mention of something that was very key, and I think that that's where we should start looking at a lot of the solutions, perhaps, to get to where we want to get to, which is how we have not approached agriculture in this holistic manner. And I think that you mentioned that we have to also have the political support or the political will. I think that's what is missing. And if we don't do that, then every time we meet here, we're going to be talking and talking and talking and nothing happens. And we also know that these are the people that have the power to make things happen. So it's about time we get some kind of advocacy, some kind of drive. Nowadays, everybody is advocating for something. Climate change, LGBTIKKTTII, all of them. Right, so I think it's about time we did that. And then what I want to just put in 2 comments and I'm done, is that we also want to learn the habit of proper data communication and data sharing. I think that when we were talking, I could see moments of disparities of Massy Stores is doing this, but I could see that these people have not connected properly to them. So hence the component of even wastage. Because there shouldn't be a situation where Massy has something that is going to expire in a shelf, and we cannot quickly transfer it to poultry or transfer it to pigs to eat. Or let's say banana farmer harvest banana, and the quality we want, we take them. The rest we can be giving it. But if you have this communication, then of course they're never going to be a waste because you know how to make use of the excess. And then of course you can also briefly, as I'm finishing, also make use of your data with your loyalty card. Because I think we constantly have changing eating habit and shopping habit. The only way we can define what to do and what to produce is to know the shopping style and the eating style of the people. And I'm sure that's with the purpose of the loyalty card. So maybe it's about time we also looked at that area and make proper use of it. So we can tell what people are eating, how they are eating it, and how do we also even do crop scheduling to know, okay, around this season, people eat this, so we increase the production of that and all of that. That solves a lot of problems that we are struggling with today. And my question to my CEO, I was once a member of a panel that discussed, or consultancy, that discussed land bank project. What became of it? And as people are struggling with land, I wanted to know the status of that project, if you could. Thank you.
Okay, just hold, Mr. Kenwell. We have limited time. We will take the final question if there is one, and the responses can come in your minutes whilst you wrap up. So is there another question on the floor? No? Is there any questions virtually? No? So we could start with our wrap-up in the essence of time. Kenwell, you can respond to that question, and if each of us take 1 minute to wrap up and bring some logical close to this discussion. Again, the discussion which was centered around agriculture being repositioned to fill more space in St. Lucia's economic basket. Bear that in mind as you prepare your final thoughts. Mr. Jabaptist?
Thank you. So the question related to the land bank, it actually was a project and consisted of a consultancy that looked at how could we effectively establish a land bank. Essentially, the challenge that we were faced with at the time that the project was being rolled out was heritage that we were talking about, a land bank, and most of the lands that were vested in a number of the agencies, HUDC, Invest Saint Lucia, and so on, a lot of these lands were being put to alternative uses. Part of the story for me was to get private landowners to place their properties in a land bank. However, at the time that that process was ensued, huge tracts of agricultural land that was state-owned was placed into alternative uses, and there's a huge argument and the discussion failed. So we're at the stage where there is incongruence with what was being advocated in the project and what state actions were advocating or what were pursuing. And that incongruence has led to a standstill in that particular project. I could review and give you further updates as to where exactly it is as we speak moving forward. Just by way of wrap up, today's conversation looks at how agriculture could be responsive in terms of its contribution to the economic basket. It's a journey that we are continuing. We recognize that a number of things are required, policies required, participation of producers like yourself and potential investors, young persons are required. But the overarching direction really has to come from country support and country directions. Along with that, when the resources are expended, persons need to be cognizant of the fact that the resources that are being invested were scarce resources and that they should optimize the utilization of these resources. After 30-something years in agriculture, I've seen us invest millions of dollars in agriculture, and persons take those millions and they squander it into everything else. It's unfortunate that sometimes good souls like yourself do not get access to those resources at the appointed time. But I just want to say to you that remain steadfast and continue striving. You shall have your opportunity. For the rest of the partners here, the marketers, agencies like CARDI and ICA, we need to continue the conversation and to continue to provide the support that is required. The exporters are having a hell of a time. I mean, the exporter here just gave you the tip of the iceberg. I mean, waste. I thought he was going to talk a lot more about wastage when it comes to storage and so on. Over the years, we've had a lot of issues of storage. Right now, I'm sure he could tell you that these importers want, how you call it, pack houses and a whole number of other investments that are required. And yes, governments and countries like Taiwan have helped us to put the pack house together, but the management of it is a challenge. So with that, I'd like to say thank you for this opportunity, and we will need to continue those conversations, perhaps as town hall meetings, where more time can be allotted for conversation. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you for that. Just bear in mind, we have just a few minutes to wrap up, so keep your wrap up and key points very short. Thank you.
Okay. Kwame, and yes, you were correct when you said about let the data lead us. For the 7 crops, I know we had some data that was collected by the Taiwanese at our stores, and we use that to make good business decisions. Food nutrition, we need to take it serious as a country, because I remember when I addressed the quartet at CARICOM, and I was asking them the question, whether we're going to build larger and larger hospitals, or are we going to address food nutrition? You know, we have a number of our health services are not ready to, support all the persons that are sick with lifestyle diseases, so it's something we have to take serious. And we know to achieve that, we have to start the diversification drive, right? And we need to, grow the crops we know that we keep importing and that are good for our health. Also, I know we're thinking of trade and export, but I just want to put one little caution in. A lot of time we want to think of export before we think of taking care of us. So let's not make people eat healthier whilst we not eating healthier. So we need to have that balance, because you could send one container over there, and then what happened? They discard the whole container. That's at your cost. You need to remember that. Sure. So let me thank everybody for the opportunity. Let me thank the moderator. I think, I really appreciated that, and the youth, the youth involvement, we cannot overlook that next time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for having me. In the essence of time, I just want to highlight that agriculture plays a pivotal role in... Thank you for having me. Okay, thank you for having me here, and in the essence of time, I'll be very brief. Just a reminder that agriculture plays a pivotal role in the improving nutritional status of a country, and the poor health affects the economic growth and development of any country. And therefore, investing in agriculture, investing in nutrition and health through agriculture can make sound economic sense, and also for the growth and development of that country. Thank you.
Good morning once again. Just to wrap up, and more or less to reiterate what has already been said, a lot of the measures, a lot of the solutions that have been identified today have been identified years ago. And so we recognize that some of the major issues are financial challenges, major challenges in terms of policy and land use. And so right now we need that national policy to guide agriculture, to build up the sector that has so much potential, and especially from where I sit, in terms of livestock development, there is so much potential for growth. Again, if we can solve those challenges that we see and that are definitely prevalent. So I want us to, we need that national thrust. We need that that champion who will push those policies and will push the sector forward. Thank you.
With regards to manufacturing, we would like to continue working with the government to try and be a lot more proactive. Because from where I sit as a business person, you cannot make a change in your business and wait 14 years to make that change. The business will collapse. So when we have legislation that's sitting on a shelf 14 years to be enacted, that for me is a nightmare for manufacturing with regards to food security. That needs to be addressed and needs to be addressed quickly. I don't want to give Dr. Melvin too much pressure here because she's a part of agriculture, but legislation needs to be enacted to help us with regards to our food security. We are doing things that is not the norm, and it needs to be addressed as quickly as possible. Manufacturing will continue to be there. They will continue to process. Cost will always be an issue for us, and because some of the things, if you look at animal feed, which is a must, we have a factory on the ground. They have to import the grain. And importing the grain, if we look at what's happening internationally, there is a lot of problems and challenges they will face down the road. So working with the government is key for us to make sure that we look at these issues and look at them quickly and not in a silo where you have to wait 6 and 7 and 8 years to get something done. It was a pleasure being here, and I hope I can get the public to understand the food safety and the quality that we eat. Local products are phenomenal.
Yes, for the export sector, it cannot exist without the production, without the reliability and consistency of production. So invariably, exporters have a role to play in the production of agricultural produce. And so I recognize the role that the Export Saint Lucia and the ministry in some ways playing to assist this new organization, the Exporters Association, which is a new entity, but is an entity that has a role to play in especially the rural economy, because we recognize, for the most part, most of the people who support the exporters are coming from the rural economy, the rural sector rather. And so the rural sector, in as much as sometimes we see agriculture and the state, the government has a social responsibility as well in ensuring that, to an extent, agriculture, though you cannot always measure its success in dollars and cents because of the risk associated with it, but by and large, it has a role to play in the sense that it engages a significant group of people in the economy and that they form the productive sector of the country. And that is critical. We have service, we have productive, and we recognize the rural communities. They do play that role. And I would just in closing make that one point. When you look at the farmer profile, the existing farmer profile that exists in the land, you would see them ranging from 70 to 50. Really and truly, we need to attract that lower group that would give more meaning to agriculture because they're younger, they're more energetic, they have the ideas. Those people 70, 50, they're just looking for retirement. So they're not always willing to give the support and put all of the effort that is required to make the agriculture a success in the way we would like to see it. Thank you.
There we have it to our listening audience. The answer to reposition a better agriculture calls for a strategic thinking, a comprehensive approach, a framework that moves along the lines towards investment, partnerships, and opportunities. Policies must dictate what we do now for the future and ensure that agriculture is well prepared and resilient to climate change. We heard so much, but one of the case in points is to hold back the caveat and the fancy language and focus on the input suppliers, move away from reactive responses and focus on inclusiveness, collaboration, the need for the bottom-up approach, strengthening farmer organization, and work towards the same goal and speaking from the same language. The change and shifts that are required is to focus and advocate around our youth and more public sensitization for the answers that farmers are looking for to better the agriculture sector. So much said, so much perspectives, and very little time to really go further with this topic. Definitely a need to re-engage all of these important sectors
and to get a better picture and to just remove some of these features on the agenda and move it from paper to practice to better the agriculture sector. I thank you to the listening audience. I thank you for being here. And as we move towards focusing on Productivity Awareness Week, we bear agriculture in mind. Buy local, eat fresh, see food differently, for it is the health of our nation. Thank you.